Thank you very much, and it's fantastic to be here. I appreciate the invite. I'm a Professor of Biodiversity in the University of Oxford, and I also am a crossbench peer in the House of Lords, which is where the Baroness bit comes, but I never use that title, so I just want to make the point. So where do I begin? Well, I begin, and this was the book that was mentioned at the beginning. I began this process actually quite a bit further back than the last couple of years. I was working on a big international project, and I was asked to, I've done a lot of work on natural capital, and on this big international project, my role was to demonstrate the natural capital, particularly in health, and the relationship between nature and human health. And I imagined I'd find papers on shading in cities and how they're good, so the indirect effects. But I kept coming across this paper, which was published in Science, so a top scientific journal in 1984, which had this picture in it. Now, I don't know how well you can see it, but what it's actually looking at is people who were having gallbladder operations, and they were looking at the length of time and the number of painkillers they took and needed after they had a gallbladder operation. And what they looked at was people whose hospital bedrooms looked onto those trees, and then others who looked onto the brick walls. And this result came up. 3 things. First of all, that they went home sooner. Second, that they had less pain relief while they were there. And third, that they were happier. And I'm quite a cynical scientist, and I thought this is ridiculous. How on earth can someone be in a hospital bedroom looking out on, just looking onto green, and have these changes occurring both physiologically and psychologically, so less pain, feeling better mentally? How does that work? So I started to look at this, and with quite a sceptical lens, I'll be honest about it. And I thought, well, what other evidence is there? And what's the mechanism of action that's happening in the body to bring about these changes? Now, there are many other things coming out right now, and that's a small study, but these are population-level studies. So there's a number of them being published right now where they look at populations, they geolocate them, and at the same time, they then look at their medical records, because we have these fantastic biobank databases now which have millions of people's medical records in. And I'm going to give you 2, which are my favourite, but there are many. So this one was published in The Lancet in Planet Health, and it was published 2 years ago, 2023. And they looked at, 2.3 million adults in Wales over 10 years. And what they did was they looked at these adults, they looked at their medical records for mental health, common mental diseases, and they looked at how close they lived to urban green space. And they had a very granular satellite imagery and found that basically people who lived close to green space, that they had a lower odds of common mental diseases. It was so statistically significant that for every 360 metres they lived further away from the green space, their common mental diseases went up. But this is the most important one. The positive effects on common mental diseases were much more, the positive effects of green space were much more pronounced on people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So it's not, oh, they're rich, there are all sorts of other things in there. That was a really, really strong result in here. So that's a really interesting, it's a correlation, but a really interesting one. And it's just not just mental health. This is my other favourite study. This is Toronto. There are many things to, I think it's Toronto. There are many things to say good about this city. For me, one of the best is every single street tree is geolocated in the whole city. And then they looked at the medical health records of people and based on how many trees they had in their street. And sure enough, what they found was that those that had more trees had significantly less cardiovascular conditions like strokes and heart attacks. And also their common mental health was much, much better. So what is going on? Why are we seeing these correlations? And these are all over the world. And if you had, I believe, if you had any other health data showing this population level, people would be jumping up and down saying, goodness, why is that? But unfortunately, the minute you say it's nature, it goes into the fluffy bunny bucket, as it's called. So I asked the question in this book, pulling together the data, and there's many people in this room that have done the work for this data, so all credit to them. But the question I asked is, okay, if we're seeing these correlations, well, what type of nature are we talking about in a city? If we're going to live 15 minutes from green space, What is it, and what mechanisms of actions are happening in our bodies to bring about these changes? So, if I go in Oxford, where I live, 15 minutes from where I can walk, there's the Botanic Garden. Should I go there? Or should I go to the local football pitch? That's my dog for scale. Or should I go to the local community woodland? Or, that's my own college, we have a green wall. Do I still get the same benefits from sitting by the green wall? And what about indoors? What about those people who can't go outside? Can they get benefits, the same benefits from nature indoors? What about, and I know we've got many designers here, so fantastic, what about biophilic design? And I was in Glasgow a couple of weeks ago. This is in Glasgow Station. Green walls are popping up in the most unknown or unexpected places. I just took a very quick photo of my camera. So this is the book I wrote, which is very much, I started off as an academic book. It moved into being a Bloomsbury book. I think that's probably the best way of putting it. And what I did was I split it into the specific interactions. So our 5 senses. So in here we've got sight, we've got smell, we've got sound, we've got touch, but also taste, or not taste, actually the environmental microbiome, the stuff that we end up swallowing and having on our skin. So what happens when those senses interact with nature? So I'm going to just for literally the next 7-10 minutes just talk about some of the findings, but there are many, and there are many in this room. I am acutely aware there are many in this room that have also done this work, and we'll be talking about it. And I'm going to talk about 3 of them: smell, sight, and also the environmental microbiome. So let's start off with sight. There are many, many studies on sight, but I like this one. Very, very simple, where they've put young women participants in front of a computer screen, 90 seconds. You either looked at the skyline of New York or you looked at a forest. What happens? Well, what they found, they measured the heart rate variability, their heartbeats, and psychological well-being, and they also brainwave activity. And you can barely see it, but actually, basically, the bottom one there is the blood flow to the prefrontal cortex in the brain, and it goes very, very quickly down when they looked at the forest. And that is a very statistically significant result. And on the other side, there's a psychological well-being indexes, and again, you can see much, much happier and much better psychological well-being. Again, very statistically significant. What's happening here, this is automatically happening. It's the autonomic nervous system, the same system that triggers your heart rate variability, it triggers your heartbeats, it triggers it affects your blood pressure. You don't have to think, I'm in nature, I feel better, or I'm looking at nature, I feel better. It happens automatically. So that's one of the pathways that seems to be automatically triggered when we interact our sight with nature. But it's not just actually those pathways. There's another really, really important pathway that's going on here. So think how often you stare out the window. Now, this is a terrible building. Can I just say there are no plants and you can't see anything out the window looking green. So sorry about that. But if you stare out the window, you know, many studies are now saying when you look out a window, it gives your focused attention a mini break. And when you come back to the task in hand, you're much more accurate at the task in hand. They've shown that many, many times. Now, this is really important, and it's particularly important for children, because this is a lovely study that was carried out in Barcelona. And in Barcelona, what they did was they looked at, I can't remember how many it was about 3,000 school children, all about 8.5 years old, across 6 schools. They took out all of the socioeconomic variables, so what the parents did, the amount of money, even the amount of distance of green they accessed on the way to school. And what they found, and you can see from this, those who could see green from their window, every month they went back to test them, they were doing better and better in terms of their cognitive performance. Now, if that isn't evidence to say why we need green in playgrounds, I'd like to know what other evidence base you want. This is published in Proceedings of the National Academy of America of Sciences, not some small journal, one of the top American journals. Okay, let's move on to smell. Again, can't smell anything in here, but anyway, we'll work on it. But the smell you get from plants is the volatile organic compounds. These are the compounds that when they're released by the plant, they turn into a gas, and that's why you can smell that smell. Now, again, lots of work's been going on this, and in particular, the smells that we most commonly encounter are pinene and also limonene. And you'll think just in the citrus or in the pine trees, but many other trees give off pinene. What happens then when we smell these smells? Well, when you smell them, The top one there is heart rate variability, parasympathetic heart rate, which is the one that's enhanced when you're physiologically relaxed, is greatly enhanced. The one at the bottom there, the heartbeat's lower. And the third one there is a psychological well-being. So you become physiologically and psychologically calmer when you smell some of these compounds. So it's not an old wives' tale that lavender makes you calmer. It does. And it's actually affecting these different pathways. But it's more than just affecting these pathways in the brain, because this is the important thing about smell. So these very faint graphs they're showing the different compounds, organic compounds, that you have in a sample of air. The top one's in a sample of air. You put it through a chromatography machine, in effect, and those peaks are the different compounds you're getting from the plants. So at the top here, that one there is a sample of air taken in a pine forest. And I've marked the red arrow there, so that's your pinene, levels of pinene. The next one down is when people go walking in the forest, they measure their bloods, and you'll see that tiny little amount is the level of pinene. The third one is after they've walked in the forest for half an hour, and that is the level of pinene in their bloods. So what's happening is when you smell a smell, you don't just push it out again, it crosses across your lung membrane and into your bloods. And once in your bloods, some of those volatile compounds interact in the same way as prescription drugs. So that there's a biochemical pathways going on. So rosemary makes you more awake because it's interacting with that same pathway as other things that you have. Mint is another really important one for making you more alert. Think how many of us suck mints or chew mint chewing gum to be awake. And there's a reason for that. But the most interesting, probably for me, is the one related to these really very heavy scents you get from cedar and the Cupressaceae family. And this was a lovely, very early experiment where they puffed out hinoki oil, so Cupressaceae, in these bedrooms, and these men slept in these rooms for 3 nights, and they measured their blood and their urine and all other things over those 3 nights, keeping everything else constant. And what they found after 3 nights, first of all, that the smell of the hinoki was affecting their endocrine system, their hormonal system. So on the end there's a really big drop in adrenaline hormone. But even more important, I think, from this one, very statistically significant again, there's a really big increase in natural killer cells. Now, these are the cells that we all want large numbers of because they attack the cancers and viruses. They're really important cells to have in our bodies. Now, one more experiment then, which is much more recent, and look, it's published in OncoTarget, one of our top cancer journals. And in here, they looked at 2 things. First of all, they looked at people who lived close to these forests versus people who are further away, and they looked at the natural killer cells in their bloods. And secondly, they looked at the natural killer cells of a group of people that went walking in the forest for 5 days. And what did they show? Well, first of all, the percentage of natural killer cells of people who lived close to these forests was statistically significant, much higher than the people who lived outside of the forest in the city. But secondly, I think even more encouraging for all of us who don't live in the middle of a forest, that actually 5 days of walking in the forest, you saw a really big increase in the levels of natural killer cells in their bloods. But even more importantly, this high level remained in their bloods for 5 days after they'd been in the forest. So you get a boost, but it doesn't immediately go back down. It gives you that resilience. So finally, I want to talk about the environmental microbiome, and I know we've got some fantastic discussions on that later on, so I don't want to steal anyone's thunder here. But this comes back to this environmental microbiome hypothesis, which came about really, and one of the authors of this is here, so I feel embarrassed to talk about his work, but naturally occurring biodiverse environments have their own microbiome. And it's full of the good bacteria, the bacteria that we're constantly being told we're going to get a week, 30 vegetables a week, or drink probiotics. And so effectively, if you spend time, it's always put forward, if you spend time in these naturally biodiverse environments, you will increase and enhance your own gut microbiome. And as a result of that, you will get all the health benefits that are associated with that, as we're learning so much more about every day, that link between gut and our other autoimmune diseases, etc. So how do you test that? So this work has been done by people in Finland. It's a series of really good studies, but I love this one. So they looked at kindergarten children, and they took, I think, 79 children, and what they did was they gave one set played in a sandpit where they brought soil in from the forest. So it was a microbially diverse soil, and the other one had sterile soil. And they measured both their gut and their skin microbiome, and they also measured inflammatory markers in their bloods on days 0, 14 and 28. What did they find? Okay, blue in there and versus the red. The red is the control, the group that didn't have the microbially diverse soil. The blue is. And what they found, first of all, a huge increase in the diversity of good bacteria on their skin and in their gut. But also these are T-cell markers. These are good markers. These show a reduction in inflammation, which has come about within 28 days of these children playing in this more microbially diverse sandpit. If ever there's an argument for children playing in good dirt, this is it. But what about us, adults? Does this happen with us? Well, yes. And this is a lovely experiment where they just looked at they put a green wall in an office, and they measured their skin diversity, but they also, again, looked at the inflammatory markers in their bloods. And after 28 days, those that had a green wall in their office had a really big increase in good bacteria on their skin, but also a really big reduction in the nasty inflammatory markers in their bloods. So it comes back to, can we bring this indoors? What do we need to do? Well, what do we need to do to increase the environmental biome in our guts? Well, first one is interact with nature, particularly work with the soils. This is why people who have allotments, who are touching soil, working with soil, do seem to have these, they measure their gut, and you can see that they are healthier. But we'll hear more about that later. Another one is things like community forests. The more biodiverse an environment, and these were community forests absolutely buzzing with the sort of good microbiome. If you're going to walk in a park, head for the bit that's got the trees at the edge. Don't go on the flat football pitch. That's my other dog. Front gardens. Front gardens are really important, and a lot of the work that's been done is about